My apologies for being a few minutes late. Hopefully it means that you are all ready to go tonight. You're in your PJs, if you haven't changed out of your PJs from last night, and you are ready to go for our story time tonight. I am just gonna wait and make sure that I am live on our Facebook page, and then I'm gonna quickly jump in and do a little bit of review from what we read last week together. Can't believe that we are already on chapter 11 of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. The weeks just seem to be flying, don't they? We're breezing through this. And by the looks of my book, we are exactly halfway through the story. Maybe even a little bit more. So, as soon as you jump on live, friends, say hi. Let me know that you're here if you're watching on Facebook, and if you're watching on the Morningstar website or the app. I so appreciate those of you that text me and email me and let me know that you're watching and that you're enjoying following along with this wonderful story. There we are. We are live on Facebook. You can see some of you are already tuning in. So last week we read chapters 9 and 10. And we kind of have two parallel stories running at the same time. We have Edmund and the witch. Edmund left his brother and his sisters with the beavers with the intention of going to the witch and telling her everything. So he left and he went to the witch's castle. And remember, he discovered all of those stone statues. He also met a wolf that he thought was a statue, and it was not a statue. It was Mogram, the head of the witch's secret police. And he told the witch everything he knew about the beavers and about his brother and his sisters being in Narnia, and they were about to set off on her sledge. And then we have the other storyline kind of running at the same time, where we have the beavers and Lucy and Peter and Susan really trying to go as quickly as they can and meet their friends at the stone table because they've heard whispers that Aslan is back in Narnia. Hello to the Huffmans. Hello, Jet and Pierce and the Robinettes. Thanks, Pastor Rob, for helping me with my technical difficulties. And the Huffmans are there. Wonderful. So, we actually met a very, very special person in the final chapter, chapter 10. They heard the jingling of the sleigh bells. You remember this? And they were very worried from where they were sleeping inside the cave that it was the White Witch. But it was not the White Witch. It was Father Christmas. And remember that we heard that the White Witch kept it always winter in Narnia and never Christmas. So we know that things are changing in Narnia because Father Christmas came and he gave very special gifts to all of the children. So this is where we left off, where they got a lovely tray of tea and breakfast from Father Christmas. And Mr. and Mrs. Beaver were serving breakfast with the three children. And then they're going to set off again for the stone table. So we pick up here in chapter 11. It's entitled Aslan is Nearer. Who is Aslan? Does anybody know who Aslan is? We've heard him in the story before. We know that it's called the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. We've met the witch. We know what the wardrobe is. So maybe we're going to find out about the lion today. So here we go. Aslan is nearer. Edmund, meanwhile, had been having a most disappointing time. When the dwarf had gone to get the sledge ready, he expected that the witch would start being nice to him as she had been at their last meeting. But she said nothing at all. And when at last Edmund plucked up his courage to say, "Please, your majesty, could I have some Turkish delight? You said," she answered, "Silence, fool." Then she appeared to change her mind and said, as if to herself, "And yet it will not do to have the brat fainting on the way. and once more clapped her hands, another dwarf appeared. "Bring the human creature food and drink," she said. The dwarf went away and presently returned, bringing an iron bowl with some water in it and an iron plate with a hunk of dry bread on it. He grinned in a repulsive manner as he set them down on the floor beside Edmund and said, "Turkish delight for the little prince." "Take it away," said Edmund sulkily. "I don't want dry bread." But the witch suddenly turned on him with such a terrible expression on her face that he apologized and began to nibble at the bread, though it was so stale he could hardly get it down. "You may be glad enough of it before you taste bread again," said the witch. While he was still chewing away, the first dwarf came back and announced that the sledge was ready. The White Witch rose and went out, ordering Edmund to go with her. The snow was again falling as they came into the courtyard, but she took no notice of that and made Edmund sit beside her on the sledge. And before they drove off, she called Mogrim, and he came bounding like an enormous dog to the side of the sledge. "Take with you the swiftest of your wolves and go at once to the house of the beavers," said the witch, "and kill whatever you find there. If they are already gone, then make all speed to the stone table, but do not be seen. Wait for me there in hiding. I, meanwhile, must go many miles to the west before I can find a place where I can drive across the river. You may overtake these humans before they reach the stone table, and you will know what to do if you find them." "I hear and obey, O queen," growled the wolf, and immediately he shot away into the snow and darkness as quickly as a horse can gallop. In a few minutes he had called another wolf and was with him down on the dam, sniffing at the beaver's house. But of course, they found it empty. It would have been a dreadful thing for the beavers and the children if the night had remained fine, for the wolves would then have been able to follow their trail, and 10 to 1 would have overtaken them before they got to the cave. But now that the snow had begun again, the scent was cold, and even the footprints were covered up. Meanwhile, the dwarf whipped up the reindeer, and the witch and Edmund drove out under the archway and on and away into the darkness and the cold. See if some more of our friends are here. Hi, Ronald. Hi, Juliet. This was a terrible journey for Edmund, who had no coat. Before, they had been going 1/4 of an hour. All the front of him was covered with snow. He soon stopped trying to shake it off because, as quickly as he did that, a whole new lot gathered, and he was so tired. Soon he was wet to the skin, and oh, how miserable he was. It didn't look now as if the witch intended to make him a king. All the things he had said to make himself believe that she was good and kind and that her side was really the right side sounded to him silly now. He would have given anything to meet the others at this moment, even Peter. The only way to comfort himself now was to try to believe that the whole thing was a dream and that he might wake up at any moment. And as they went on, hour after hour, it did come to seem like a dream. This lasted longer than I could describe, even if I wrote pages and pages about it. But I will skip on to the time when the snow had stopped and the morning had come, and they were racing along in the daylight. And still they went on and on, with no sound but the everlasting swish of the snow and the creaking of the reindeer's harness. And then at last the witch said, "What have we here? Stop!" And they did. How Edmund hoped she was going to say something about breakfast. But she had stopped for quite a different reason. A little way off at the foot of a tree sat a merry party. A squirrel and his wife with their children, and 2 satyrs and a dwarf and an old dog fox, all on stools around a table. Edmund couldn't quite see what they were eating, but it smelled lovely, and there seemed to be decorations of holly, and he wasn't at all sure that he didn't see something like a plum pudding. At the moment when the sledge stopped, the fox, who was obviously the oldest person present, had just risen to its feet, holding a glass in its right paw as if it were going to say something. But when the whole party saw the sledge stopping and who was in it, all the gaiety went out of their faces. The father squirrel stopped eating with his fork halfway to his mouth, and one of the satyrs stopped with its fork actually in its mouth, and the baby squirrel squeaked with terror. "What is the meaning of this?" asked the White Witch. Nobody answered. "Speak, vermin," she said again. "Or do you want my dwarf to find you a tongue with his whip? What is the meaning of all this gluttony, this waste, this self-indulgence? Where did you find all these things?" "Please, your majesty," said the fox, "we were given them, and if we might make so bold as to drink your majesty's very good health." "Who gave them to you?" said the witch. "Father Christmas," stammered the fox. "What?" roared the witch, springing from the sledge and making a few strides nearer to the terrified animals. "He has not been here. He cannot have been here. How dare you? But no, say you have been lying, and you shall even now be forgiven." At that moment, one of the young squirrels lost its head completely. He has! It squeaked, beating its little spoon on the table. Edmund saw the witch bite her lips so that a drop of blood appeared on her white cheek. Then she raised her wand. "Oh, don't, please don't," shouted Edmund. But even while he was shouting, she had waved her wand, and instantly, where the merry party had been, there were only statues of creatures. One with its stone fork fixed forever halfway to its stone mouth, seated round a stone table on which there were stone plates and a stone plum pudding. "As for you," said the witch, giving Edmund a stunning blow on the face as she remounted the sledge, "let that teach you to ask favor for spies and traitors. Drive on." And Edmund, for the first time in the story, felt sorry for someone besides himself. It seemed so pitiful to think of those little stone figures sitting there all the silent days and all the dark nights, year after year, till the moss grew on them, and at last even their faces crumbled away. Now they were steadily racing on again, and soon Edmund noticed that the snow which splashed against them as they rushed through it was much wetter than it had been all last night. At the same time, he noticed that he was feeling much less cold. It was also becoming foggy. In fact, every minute it was becoming foggier and warmer. And the sledge was not running nearly as well as it had been running up till now. At first he thought this was because the reindeer were tired, but soon he saw that that couldn't be the real reason. The sledge jerked and skidded and kept on jolting as if it had struck against stones. And however the dwarf whipped the poor reindeer, the sledge went slower and slower. There also seemed to be a curious noise all around them. But the noise of their driving and jolting and the dwarfs shouting at the reindeer prevented Edmund from hearing what it was. Until suddenly the sledge stuck so fast that it wouldn't go on at all. When that happened, there was a moment's silence. And in that silence, Edmund could at last listen to the other noise properly. A strange, sweet, rustling, chattering noise, and yet not so strange, for he'd heard it before, if only he could remember where. Then all at once, he did remember. It was the noise of running water. All around them, though out of sight, there were streams clattering, murmuring, bubbling, splashing, and even in the distance, roaring. And his heart gave a great leap, though he hardly knew why, when he realized that the frost was over. And much nearer there was a drip, drip, drip from the branches of all the trees. And then, as he looked at one tree, he saw a great load of snow slide off it. And for the first time since he had entered Narnia, he saw the dark green of a fir tree. Now, I have a question for you. Why do you think the snow is going away and water is starting to rush and bubble and gurgle? Why do you think? And the snow is falling off the trees. Here, I was supposed to show you a picture. So while you're typing in those answers, take a look at, there is the family or maybe they're a family and friends who were celebrating some wonderful dinner together and then got turned into stone by the witch. And there's the witch with Edmund and the dwarf driving the reindeer. And you can tell me why you think the snow is going away and the rain or the rivers are starting to flow. All right, let's pick up here. And he hadn't time to listen or watch any longer, for the witch said, "Don't sit staring, fool! Get out and help!" And of course, Edmund had to obey. He stepped out into the snow, but it was really only slush by now, and began helping the dwarf to get the sledge out of the muddy hole it had got into. They got it out in the end, and by being very cruel to the reindeer, the dwarf managed to get it on the move again, and they drove a little further. And now the snow was really melting in earnest, and patches of green grass were beginning to appear in every direction. Unless you have looked at a world of snow as long as Edmund had been looking at it, you will hardly be able to imagine what a relief those green patches were after the endless white. Then the sledge stopped again. "It's no good, your majesty," said the dwarf. "We can't sledge in this thaw." "Then we must walk," said the witch. "We shall never overtake them walking," growled the dwarf. "Not with the start they've got." "Are you my counselor or my slave?" said the witch. "Do as you're told. Tie the hands of the human creature behind it and keep hold of the end of the rope. And take your whip and cut the harness off the reindeer. They'll find their own way home." The dwarf obeyed, and in a few minutes, Edmund found himself being forced to walk as fast as he could with his hands tied behind him. He kept on slipping in the slush and mud and wet grass, and every time he slipped, the dwarf gave him a curse and sometimes a flick with the whip. The witch walked behind the dwarf and kept on saying, "Faster! Faster!" Every moment, the patches of green grew bigger and the patches of snow grew smaller. Every moment, more and more of the trees shook off their robes of snow. Soon, wherever you looked, instead of white shapes, you saw the dark green of firs or the black, prickly branches of bare oaks and beeches and elms. Jet says because of Aslan, the spell is starting to be broken, Kenzie. I think both of those things are true. Well, we're going to find out. Nathan says because it's hot. Well, that is true. It's warming up. Things are warming up and the snow is melting. Do you think it's because of Aslan and because the spell is breaking? Let's find out. Then the mist turned from white to gold and presently cleared away altogether. Shafts of delicious sunlight struck down onto the forest floor, and overhead you could see a blue sky between the treetops. Here is a picture of the witch. They are now off of their sleigh, and there's Edmund with his hands tied behind him, being led by the dwarf. Soon there were more wonderful things happening. Coming suddenly round a corner into a glade of silver birch trees, Edmund saw the ground covered in all directions with little yellow flowers. Celandines. The noise of the water grew louder. Presently, they actually crossed a stream. Beyond it, they found snowdrops growing. "Mind your own business," said the dwarf when he saw that Edmund had turned his head to look at them, and he gave the rope a vicious jerk. But of course, this didn't prevent Edmund from seeing. Only 5 minutes later, he noticed a dozen crocuses growing round the foot of an old tree, gold and purple and white. Then came a sound even more delicious than the sound of the water. Close beside the path they were following, a bird suddenly chirped from the branch of a tree. It was answered by the chuckle of another bird a little further off. And then, as if that had been a signal, they were chattering and chirping in every direction. And then a moment of full song. And within 5 minutes, the whole wood was ringing with birds' music. And wherever Edmund's eyes turned, he saw birds alighting on branches, or sailing overhead, or chasing one another, or having their little quarrels, or tidying up their feathers with their beaks. Before I turn the page, here are some of the lovely flowers that are peeking out of the grass. Beautiful, isn't it? Doesn't this kind of feel like what we're experiencing now? Winter finally is over. There's tulips coming up in my garden and some daffodils. In fact, we were out there planting raspberries and blueberry plants today. But this is happening much quicker, like within one day, everything is changing. All right. Faster, faster, said the witch. There was no trace of the fog now. The sky became bluer and bluer, and now there were white clouds hurrying across it from time to time. In the white glades, there were primroses. A light breeze sprang up, which scattered drops of moisture from the swaying branches and carried cool, delicious scents across the faces of the travelers. The trees began to come fully alive. The larches and birches were covered with green, the laburnums with gold. Soon the beech trees had put forth their delicate, transparent leaves. As the travelers walked under them, the light also became green. A bee buzzed across their path. "This is no thaw," said the dwarf, suddenly stopping. This is spring! What are we to do? Your winter has been destroyed, I tell ya. This is Aslan's doing. If either of you mentions that name again, said the witch, he shall instantly be killed. And that is the end of chapter 11. And I think that I'm out of time today, friends. It is already 7:30. And I am sure that bedtime is right around the corner. And this next chapter is actually quite long. And you were right, at least according to the dwarf. The dwarf believes that this spring that is coming is because of Aslan. So next week, when we read chapter 12, I have a feeling that we are going to maybe meet Aslan and find out what's going to happen in the rest of the story. So I'm going to leave it there because it is 7:30. Chapter 12 is called Peter's First Battle. So we will pick up with chapter 12 next week. And my friends, we only have, I think, three Sundays left, and we're going to find out how this story ends. So thank you so much for being here. Nathan, Ethan, Jet. I think you're right, Jet. It is because of Aslan. And the Huffmans and the Robinettes. Have a great night, everybody. I love joining with you all on Sunday nights and getting to read this together. And we're going to pick up our story again next Sunday. Bye, everybody. Have a fabulous week.